My name is Carsen Dettman. I'm from central Nebraska. This story is going to be about my late season archery mule deer hunt in 2020 and my early season archery mule deer hunt in 2021 in Idaho.
Let's go! He's nice.
Now that's a giant.
Finally happened.
Oh man. Wow. Look at the payoff.
Yeah, buddy. We did it.
So this story really begins, obviously, when I was younger. I hunted a lot with my dad and my grandpa. Here in Nebraska, mainly hunting whitetail. But my grandpa would travel to Idaho every year to see his best friend, which is also his cousin. He'd go out there every year, chucker and grouse hunting. And I think they even did quite a bit of gold mining out there. I don't know if they ever hit it big or anything, but they'd go out and he really enjoyed it out there and always wanted me to put in for a tag out there. And spring of 2020, he finally convinced me to put in for a tag, and I just so happened I drew up my first year, and he was obviously super excited when I finally drew that tag for the late season, which was end of December. I ended up actually losing my grandpa in 2020, the end of August, so he didn't get to see all the big bucks I found out there, but I know he was with us during the whole hunt. And so October of 2020 was actually the first year I had ever tried my hand at mule deer hunting. I decided to go out to western Nebraska. Tim was gracious enough to let my buddy Matt and I hunt out there. We hunted a few days. I think it was the third day we were there. I ended up spotting a pretty nice buck, bedded not too far off the road in a pasture that we could hunt. He's basically bedded on a Y. He was on one side, I was on the other, leading down to the main valley. And right at sunrise, he was bedded on the hillside, and I was on this hillside at 65 yards watching him for, I think I basically took a nap with him for almost 2.5 hours before he finally made his way down to the base of that Y, which it was where I was sitting waiting for him. And I made a 37-yard shot, and he ran maybe 150 yards and piled up. And I think from that moment on, I've just been absolutely hooked on mule deer. That was my first stock ever, and that buck ended up scoring 173 inches. Garrett still gives me a hard time for that being my first stock and killing a 173-inch mule deer with my bow. And he's been on however many stalks and mule deer hunts, and apparently I guess it's not that easy, but beginner's luck, I always tell him. So finally it was time for Garrett and I to head to Idaho. We had I think it was about a 15-hour drive altogether. And as soon as I pulled up there, my Uncle George met me outside by his truck and asked if we were ready to be showed around some of the area that we could hunt in the unit.
We're gonna head out. George is gonna kind of show us around. He's got a couple spots where he's been seeing some bucks, so we're gonna see if we can't go lay eyes on something at least.
And we saw quite a few deer, and Garrett and I thought we kind of had a game plan for the next day. As soon as the sun started coming up, we were seeing deer. We were actually watching a pretty good buck for a while before a hunter bumped it. So we decided to move a little bit farther along the mountain, sat there for a while, didn't really spot a whole lot. And we'd been sitting there for probably a half hour, 45 minutes, and Garrett just wanted to get a little bit different angle and ended up moving and spotted the top of some guy's head. So we ended up actually going over and talking to the guy to see what his plan was, so we didn't end up messing each other's hunts up. It ended up being a guy named David Lamont, who at the time worked for Archery Idaho, which is owned by Patrick Kosmicki. We kind of hit it off, talked to him, and ended up actually hunting together for the rest of the evening. We spotted some deer kind of at last light too far, and it was going to get dark before we could get over to them. But he had mentioned that he had really wanted to shoot a turkey, and so we invited them out for the 2021 spring turkey season, and both of them ended up getting longbeards with their bows out in Nebraska. So that was kind of cool. We met him up on the mountain and brought him out to Nebraska. But we headed back down the mountain to my uncle's house for the night, tried to get a game plan for day 2 hunting in Idaho. So once we got up to the top of the mountain where we wanted to be, a storm started rolling in. It started getting really windy, and obviously that put all the deer into the timber. So we decided that we would head back down the mountain, head back to my uncle's house, and kind of regroup and figure out a different game plan. Once we got down to the base of the mountain, down to the foothills, we ended up spotting a few deer in the sagebrush. One ended up actually being a pretty decent buck that we nicknamed Gimpy, and that kind of changed the whole direction of where we decided to hunt, because up on top of the mountain was just completely foreign to us. But down where we had found these deer is kind of like hunting out in western Nebraska, so we started focusing more on that area. On day 3, we ended up heading over to the spot that Garrett and I both nicknamed the Rim. I ended up sitting about halfway up on the rim, and Garrett went all the way up on top to glass over some fields. And I had a decent buck come underneath me, but I ended up getting spooked, and so I ended up going up on top of the rim with Garrett, and we spotted quite a few really nice bucks. So the morning of day 4, we headed back up the rim, and we were spotting deer, but they were way farther down than what we anticipated them being. So we worked our way around the top of the rim, glassing into the shadows as we went, and ended up spotting quite a few doe, and then actually a decent younger buck, not one that we wanted to shoot. We ended up moving up the cliff even more to probably the steepest part of the cliff, which ended up being our glassing point from then on. And right off that cliff, we found one of the biggest typicals of the whole trip that we nicknamed Sleepy Joe. Later that afternoon, after we bedded down with some does, I went down one of their trails, tried to make a stalk on him. He had actually moved by the time I got down there, and everything down there looked so much different than up on top of that cliff. Some of that sagebrush was over my head, and there's a lot more ditches and rock in there than what I thought. And I got within about 90 yards of him, but he knew something was going on, so he kind of went down the rim even farther. But there was 2 other bucks. There was a wide buck and then a big 4x4 with a kicker off his G2. And I got within 30 yards of both of those deer, and the wide buck actually spotted me. Both of those bucks ended up heading about over where Sleepy Joe went, and that's about all the action for day 4. We headed back to the truck. We knew exactly where we wanted to be for day 5. So the morning of day 5, we ended up hiking up to our glassing point, which was about 2.5 miles in. Right away we spotted a buck that we knew, Gimpy, that we had spotted from the road a few days before that. I ended up getting up above him. He bedded at the base of a cliff. The wind wasn't great, but he ended up looking right at me as I drew. My rangefinder said 55, but what I didn't account for was how long the arrow was going to be in the air. Put my 55-yard pin on him, pulled the trigger. Arrow went right underneath him as he got out of his bed, but that arrow was probably in flight for, I think we figured it up, it was like 110 yards. So he had a decent amount of time to get up out of his bed before that arrow made it to him. And that's the only shot I got on day 5. So the morning of day 6, we headed up to our original glassing point, spotted one really nice buck. I ended up staying right above him. He was working his way along the bottom of the rim, and there's just a few passes where the deer can come up and over. So I was kind of going to try to cut him off. And Garrett went back to the south to where the rim kind of comes out so he could watch the buck and where I was at. And a guy came over the top of the rim not knowing that I was on a buck, and ended up spooking him back towards Garrett. I thought the buck had completely blown out of the area, so I put my boots back on, got my pack and my bow, and started heading back over to where Garrett was. Garrett and I met up. He actually still knew exactly where the buck was at. That buck was heading up a deep pass, a deep draw basically, and at the top of the draw was a cluster of boulders. So I worked around the rim of the top, got into the boulders, and I'm sitting behind a rock. I can't see the buck at all, so I'm ranging different rocks. I had no idea how close that buck was. He was probably 10 yards on the other side of the rock I was behind, and that morning it was just crisp. There's no wind or anything, and the click of my rangefinder is the only thing I can think of that alerted that buck that there was something behind that rock. We ended up losing that buck. Last chance I had on that hunt. So yeah, that basically concludes the late season 2020 archery mule deer hunt. So 2021, I actually put in for a early season archery tag in a different unit.
All right, September 10th. Garrett and I are currently on our way to Idaho. We're gonna be staying in Cheyenne, Wyoming tonight, and then leave early in the morning. So hopefully we can get some scouting in tomorrow afternoon and get a game plan put together for Sunday. But we got about a 14-hour trip, so yeah, it's a long one.
So George showed us around the unit as soon as we got there, and right away Garrett and I realized that the terrain was going to be totally different than what we had hunted the year before that. And we did spot some muley does, but we drove around, checked everything out, and kind of got a game plan for the first morning of the hunt.
There's 3 of them there. That is a good deer. It literally looks like his tines almost come up and they almost touch. Way up here. Can't tell if he's bedded down. Alright, it's our first morning here in Idaho, and we didn't really know where we wanted to start this morning. We drove around with George last night and he kind of showed us around the area, but so our plan this morning was just to drive around right at shooting light and kind of see if we could spot anything from the roads and then go from there. And sure enough, Garrett, the first thing he spotted was a herd of elk with a decent bull in it. And we were watching those for a while, and then he spotted a really nice muley run off the backside of the ridge that they were on. And so I was watching a lot of this has been burned, so there's a lot of good regrowth. And I was looking into that and found 3 good young bucks. Nothing that we really probably want to go after, but we popped over the backside of this other ridge where we kind of originally wanted to go look, and that's what's behind me right now. But we saw there's 4 young bucks walking right on the horizon down there. So I think tomorrow morning we kind of got a game plan. We're gonna glass from a higher point over there. There's a burn, and we think that they went down into that, and it's deep enough and big enough that we're hoping that there's some bigger bucks in there. But
So after the morning hunt, Garrett and I headed back down the mountain. Some of my younger cousins, Rose and George's grandkids, they were going to be around, so I wanted to hang out with them. And so the morning of day 2, on our way up the mountain, we spotted a decent young bull elk, and then we hiked up to our glassing point, spotted a few does, but really we didn't spot a whole lot of deer at all that day. The deer movement, it was a hotter day, didn't see a whole lot of deer. Everything that we did see went into some thick stuff, so not a whole lot happened day 2. Morning of day 3, we ended up spotting another bachelor group, and we saw it had a big frame, 2x2, and then I think what was a 4x4 or a 5x5, which both were going to be shooters at that point. And we watched them. They bedded underneath the cliff. Garrett stayed in a spot where he was able to watch them and film with the camera as I snuck around the back side of them, which ended up being about probably a 2.5 mile stalk. When I first came over the top of the rocks, I thought maybe they had got out of their beds and walked past me. So I decided I was either gonna just slowly work my way back and hope to find them. And lo and behold, I ended up spotting one of the really small younger bucks that was with the group, bedded down. and took my boots off, snuck my way up to the bigger rocks, and there was a hole in one of the rocks, and through that hole I could just see the back and the frame of that big 2x2 at about 20 yards. He was bedded facing away from me, quartered to me, more than what I had actually thought. I thought he was more broadside. I shot, arrow went perfect right behind his shoulder, but since he was quartering to me a little bit more, the exit wound was right in front of the back leg. Ended up taking out what I think one lung and the liver, and all the other bucks ran up the mountain and over, and he ran kind of along the mountain and then eventually worked his way down into a burn where we lost him. And I met back up with Garrett. He wasn't exactly sure on the shot either, so we gave him some time, went back down to George's, got some stuff, came back up the mountain for the recovery.
The way he was laying, I think I got one lung and liver, and then it exited out right in front of his back leg. So we gave him plenty of time. I shot him at 9:30 and it's about 5:30 right now. So we never saw him leave this pocket. So we're gonna go in there and see if we can't find him.
I slowly started working my way through the burn, and probably about 100 yards from where I quit tracking him, he was dead in his bed, right in the burn, right above a creek. I yelled up high to Garrett and let him know that that buck was dead. Garrett was probably 300 yards up the mountain above me, watching to see if anything would run out of there.
Carsen just yelled that he found him, so time to go down and take some pictures and get him cut up and packed out of here.
He's a 2x3. He's got a big frame though.
That's freaking cool.
Big buck. It's the only stock I've taken this year and it was successful. My first stock of every year apparently is a good one.
Alright, as you guys can see, we found him. It didn't take too long. Actually, when I quit tracking him, I was only about 100 yards away. And he's been dead for probably, I'd say 2 hours. So we'll still be able to salvage all the meat and everything. But just a big framed 2x2. I guess he could be a 3x2, but I'm happy with him. We haven't seen a whole lot of big bucks at all. This is probably, it was him and another one were the biggest bucks that we've seen. So this is the first stock in 4 days that I've got. So I'm pretty happy actually. It was a whole lot of fun hunting out there. It is tough. The terrain that they live in is just incredible, and you can see why some of those deer just get giant out there. It was a blast being able to hang out with my uncle and all my cousins from out there and have a lot of fun with all of them. aside from how much we love to hunt, we really love bringing these episodes to you guys to watch at home. There's not possibly enough time in an episode to show everything that went on, all the different experiences that we had. But thanks again for watching, and we hope you guys tune in for the next one.